And they went above and beyond, and I'm thrilled to say that they decided to send the president of Citizens for Self-Governance and one of the key players in the Convention of the States project. So please welcome our wonderful guest speaker today, Mark Meckler.
Well, first of all, man, I'm blown away. It's incredible to come to Illinois, to come to the Chicago area and see this many people. I've been looking for unicorns all over the country, but this is ridiculous. You know, I just tweeted something out. I took a picture of the group, one of those panorama pictures on the iPhones, and I do this everywhere I go when I come to a meeting like this. They're all big, by the way, all the meetings across the country I'm going to, and all getting bigger. And it's interesting because we keep hearing reports of the early demise of the Tea Party movement, right? Yeah. So I have this habit now every time I go to one of these meetings, and I did it today. I took a picture, and then I tweeted out, this is what the early death of the Tea Party movement looks like. And I'm doing this because I just need to document this for the media, because when I go on television and they tell me that they hear that the Tea Party movement is struggling, et cetera, I like to ask them if they've been looking at my Twitter stream lately. And so it's important that you guys know that this is going on all over the country. That while you're unique because you're here in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and that does make you unique, you need to know that this is going on outside New York City. It's going on in San Francisco. It's going on all over the country in places that the mainstream media will never tell you about. They think that you don't exist in places like this. And so it's important that you stand up and be seen. It's important that I tweet about it, that we talk about it in the media, because Americans who believe in the Constitution, they're everywhere. They're all over the country. There is a renaissance taking place in America. I think what we're doing right now is we are actually refounding the country based on the original principles. What do you guys think about that? Before I really dig in, I have to put a couple of rumors to rest. I heard a rumor this morning that I rode my horse in from California. That is not true. I did hear a rumor that I actually drove in, and while I think a lot of you came from a lot further and are more heroic for being here, I was in Arizona last night. It'd be a long drive. I actually flew in from Phoenix last night. So, and it's really wonderful to be here. Carol's been trying to get me here for a while. You guys have incredible leadership here. And I apologize, it's taken me a while to get here. And the reason is because there's always a balance that all of us do when we're engaged in politics. And for me, it's a really difficult balance between family and politics. And they overlap a lot because why are we engaged in politics? I mean, the real root reason for most of us is because of our families, because we care about the country. We look at our kids or our grandkids or nephews and nieces. I look at my parents who are in their 70s and retired, and I think we have to fight for them. And so for me, I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time on the road, and my daughter is 14 and a half, my son's 18, getting ready to sign up for the Marines, and I try to make sure that I'm home every weekend for them. And my daughter's a soccer player, soccer phenom, and so I make sure I'm home every Saturday for her. And so though Carol's been asking me to come, she's been very patient because soccer season had to end. I couldn't miss a Saturday game, so I appreciate your patience. You know, as I was driving in this morning from the hotel, I saw something that always makes my heart skip a beat. It makes me really happy. And driving through some beautiful neighborhoods around here, it's really a beautiful area, and I saw one of those flags flying on the front of somebody's house. And when I see that, it really, I feel a kinship with the people in that house. I know why they're flying that flag. You know, for people who aren't involved in the movement, they probably see that flag and they don't understand what it means, and I don't know, maybe they think some redneck like me lives there. But I see it, and I know there are people in that house who care about the Constitution. I know there are people in that house that fear for the state of the country now and for the future of the country. And I know that there are people in that house that are willing to put it on the line and take a personal risk in their community by flying a flag like that in front of the house. And I know there are people in that house that just aren't going to take it anymore. So it makes me really proud to see that flag. You know, I'm always really proud to see the American flag, and thank God we see a lot of those around the country these days. But when I see that, that's somebody who's defiant. And that kind of defiance is what has defined America from the very beginning. You know, we study the history of this country, and we do a pretty poor job of it in school, I would say in our public schools, generally speaking. And when we study that history, we tend to study the great men of history. And we study history around what I call the great man theory of history. In other words, everything happens because of these big figures we know from history. But history has an interesting bias to it, which is that the people who are recorded in history are the people who wrote, right? So these are the people who wrote about themselves, about their exploits. They're the people who give good speeches. The people who stand up in front of the room and inspire others. Those are the people that we know about in history for obvious reasons. But the truth is, those are just a tiny sliver of history. So when we study American history and we study Washington and Adams and Madison and the words of Patrick Henry resonate in our ears, right? Give me liberty or give me death. But we know all of those things. I think that's good, and I think those people are inspiring. And this is not to denigrate them, but those are not the people who fought and won the American Revolution by and large. And I think there's a danger in only paying attention to those people, and the danger is we look at those people and we might be asking ourselves, you know, where is Patrick Henry today? Where is George Washington today? You know, those people, they're so big and they were so eloquent, and we've almost deified those people, and it's a standard that you think you look at those people and how could we possibly be like them? And more importantly, I think we tend to ask ourselves, how could I possibly be like that? I mean, how could I be like George Washington or Madison or Adams or Patrick Henry? And I think it's the wrong standard, because those are not the people who fought and died by and large in the American Revolution. Those are not the people even who led the American Revolution by and large, and mostly we don't know those stories, and I think that's a sad loss in American history. I had the privilege of stumbling across a book a couple of years ago by a woman by the name of Pauline Maier, M-A-I-E-R. And she was a historian, passed away literally just in the last 6 months, a historian at MIT of all places. And Maier wrote a book called The Old Revolutionaries, and she was trying to put in context personally the people who fought and died in the American Revolution. She gives us a picture of who those people really were and why they fought. Now, that's not easy to do, and one of the big reasons it's not easy to do is they did not have YouTube. They did not have Twitter, and generally speaking, it was considered sort of uncouth to write about yourself and to promote yourself. And in fact, in a lot of the records of the battles that we have from the American Revolution, the people who would write about the battles, and they might even write names in their original writings, they would then erase the names because they understood that it was not about any one individual, it was about the cause. So it's a hard thing to study, but we do have some stories from that period, and the stories are important, and they're important to put into context the fight that I think we're fighting today. My favorite story from the American Revolution is about a captain from the American Revolution by the name of Levi Preston. And in the early 1840s, a gentleman by the name of Mellon Chamberlain, who was a self-appointed historian of the American Revolution, was traveling around the country, and he was trying to collect the oral histories of these Revolutionary War heroes. He understood the heroes, the people who actually fought, were in their late 80s, early 90s. There weren't many of them left, and we were losing the last of them, and he knew this was the last chance to collect those histories. And he was in North Carolina in 1843, and he came across Captain Levi Preston, and Preston had fought at the battles of Lexington and Concord, the original starting battles of the American Revolution. Now, Chamberlain, by the 1840s, had already subscribed to this great man theory of the American Revolution. And so in questioning Preston, and he recounts this story in a telling he did at the North Church in Concord in about 1870. In questioning Chamberlain, he asks him, why did you go to fight, Captain Preston? Why did you go out at Lexington that day? And at the time, Preston was a farmer. He was about 23 years old. He had a family. He'd never fought in a war. I mean, he'd hunted. He had a rifle. But when he was called, he went out and he asked him, why would you go out and fight? I mean, if you think about it, you're fighting the greatest fighting force ever assembled by mankind, the Redcoats. And to put that in context, and I think we don't really do this, it's as if I was here today and I said, look, guys, I know that there's a Marine battalion moving into town. I'd like you to all go home and get your firearms. We're going to meet in the park and we're going to fight them. And this is really what they were being asked to do. And so he asked him, why would you go out and do that? Were you reading Burke and the great revolutionary minds of the day? And he said, son, most of us couldn't read, and those of us who did were reading the Psalms and the Almanac and the Bible, and that's about it. And he said, well, were you inspired to fight because of the tea tax? And he said, son, we were farmers. We didn't drink any tea. We knew the boys threw it in the harbor, and we thought that was good, but that was about the last we heard of it. He said, well, then it must have been British tyranny. You must have been fighting against the oppressions because the British must have been oppressing you. He said, we never saw any troops. We never felt any oppressions. And he said, well, what about the Stamp Act? Was it having to buy those stamps? Was that an offense so intense to you that you were forced onto the field of battle that day? He said, son, the governor locked him in the armory, and that's the last we ever heard. I never bought a stamp. He said, I don't understand. Why would you risk all? Why would you go on the field of battle against the greatest fighting force in history and risk it all? And I think these words are really important to me, and they sum up the American Revolution. He said, when we went out to fight them redcoats, we knew only one thing. We'd always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. And them redcoats, they intended we shouldn't. That was it. That's the basis for the American Revolution. The basis isn't grand speeches by Patrick Henry. The basis is not profoundly wonderful leadership by George Washington. The basis is this idea, really simple idea, that we were a free people. We had liberty, and we were fighting to maintain liberty. This is unusual in all revolutions in history. If you go back and look at all revolutions, they were usually enslaved people fighting to be free. But we were a self-governing people, unique in all of human history. This is really incredible as we study American history. How many people are reading more history now than they read in school? Or, yeah, me too. I mean, incredible what I'm learning reading all this history. Now, as I look back on the way I was taught American history, and I would venture a guess most of you are taught the same way, you have the Pilgrims come over, you've got Plymouth Rock, you've got the settlement at Jamestown, right, the Mayflower Compact, all that stuff. And then you have the American Revolution. That's how American history is taught, right? So there's really nothing that takes place in that time period between the original colonies, the original settlements, and the American Revolution. So when you're taught it that way, and this is how we look at history anyway, right? Kind of a telephoto lens, everything compacts, you can't tell everything. There's a period in there between the original colonies and the American Revolution. Anybody know roughly how long that period is? And when somebody asked me this question before I started to study it, I didn't know the answer at all. I thought, no, I don't really know. And I started thinking, is it 50 years? Is it 80 years? It's about 158 years, roughly, okay? I mean, that's incredible. We don't know that history. It's 158 years. And during that 158 years, the most important thing that happened was that England pretty much left us alone. It was called a policy of benign neglect, right? So the colonists were over here, they were on the other side of the ocean. What could the crown really do? There was no standing army here from the crown. They had no way to tell us what to do. You know, there were some British governors, there was certainly some structure from England, but there was no control by England over the colonists. And what that meant is that of necessity, by the grant of God's liberty, they had to figure out how to govern themselves, right? It's 150 years of figuring this out. Again, unique in all of human history. I want you to think back in all of human history, this had never happened before. Kingdoms had split up and people already had governing structures, and so they formed offshoots of those structures. But here, in a new land, across an ocean, an entire country begins to develop and govern itself. And then one day, this now foreign power, after 5 generations, many people on the continent never having set foot in England, right? Not knowing anybody in England, the King of England says, you no longer have the right to govern yourselves. And at that moment, people like Levi Preston said, no way. My father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, they had always governed themselves. Our families have always governed themselves. And so those men and those women and those families that were fighting, that fought in the American Revolution, were fighting to preserve one thing, and that is their liberty. This unique, God-granted opportunity to live in freedom and to live by self-determination and self-governance. Now, I think this is really important. The reason I tell you this story, and the reason I take so much time on this story, and I go so far back in history, is because you are Levi Preston, right? You may not see yourself as George Washington. You may not be the person to stand up in front of the room and take the microphone and wax eloquent, but you are Levi Preston. We're all Levi Preston, and our families are all Preston's families. And we're all putting it on the line for one reason and one reason only, and that is, I believe, that the federal government, even the state governments, are taking away our liberty. And you know, we've always governed ourselves, and we always intend to, right? Are you guys with me on that? Now, you guys have done an extraordinary thing in American history, and I'm going to jump way forward. right? From 1843 in the story of Mellon Chamberlain and Levi Preston, I'm going to jump forward to 2009. It's a big leap. But something historic happened in 2009. It's really important you remember. You know, when we're living something, when we're at this meeting today, it's very rare that any of us drive to a meeting like this and think, wow, this is history happening today, right? But it is history happening today, and history's been happening in a big way, in a profound way, since 2009, and that history begins with the Tea Party movement. You heard Carol mention Rick Santelli and his rant, and that's really what launched the Tea Party movement. And just a few days later, on February 27th, 2009, the first tea parties took place around the country. I think Denise was at one of those tea parties and organized one of those tea parties. You know, I had one in Sacramento, California. There were 35 of them around the country. We estimate roughly 39,000 people came out on that day. No budget, no promotion, no nothing, just citizen activism, just Levi Preston stepping up all over the country. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? I think that's amazing. So then a group of people get together and say, you know, that was fun. I was one of these people. That was incredible. I can't believe that happened. We should do this again. And we decide we don't know what we're doing, but let's do it on April 15th because people are already really pissed off on April 15th. Seemed like a good day. It was 7 weeks later. We were pretty audacious in our thinking. We thought if we had had 39 or 35 of these around the country with just a week notice, maybe we could have 100 of them around the country, right? Maybe 150. I mean, that was just outrageous to think. Could we actually hold 100, 150 of these protests around the country? We threw up a website called taxdayteaparty.com. A lot of people started to list their protests, including you, on that website. And you know, I was one of the people, I was entering these protests manually. We were so unsophisticated, there was no way for people to enter protests. They actually had to email them to us and we had to post them on the site. I was so naive, I put my home phone number on the website. I had no idea what was about to happen to me. My wife still reminds me of that. So in the first few days, we exceeded the 35 listed there. And at the end of the first week, it was over 100 listed there. And at the end of the second week, it was over 200 listed there. And the thing was just going crazy. We were ecstatic and scared, and we had no idea what was going on. We had no budget. We just had a web page and some volunteers. And, you know, it just kept growing. And at about week three and a half, there was a message left on my voicemail, somebody saying they were Neil Cavuto's producer and they wanted to attend our event. And I actually thought it was a crank phone call. And I had my wife Patty call him back and she told me, no, that really was Neil Cavuto's producer. They really do want to come. And so they said they were coming to our event in Sacramento. Hannity's producer called Jenny Beth Martin out in Atlanta and said they were going to the Atlanta event. Greta did the Washington, D.C. event. Fittingly, somehow, Glenn Beck was at the Alamo. Once Fox picked it up and started talking about it, as you can imagine, things just went crazy. We went from 200 to 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 events. Now, April 13th, 2009, when we shut down registration on the website because all of us were planning our own events, there were over 850 events listed. Now, that's your history. That's pretty incredible, don't you think? It's important that you know these numbers and you know that history because people are going to tell you the Tea Party is this, the Tea Party is that, the Tea Party can't ever do anything, never really accomplish anything. It's your history. So we go to this event on April 15th. How many of you were at the April 15th, 2009 Tea Party events? So there's a whole bunch of people in here that witnessed and were participants in that. By the way, thank you for being there. So all over the country, it was extraordinary, wasn't it? To be in those crowds and be with all those people. That was a historic event. In Sacramento, we had 20,000 people show up, and I remember being there the night before. We had this huge stage, and I mean, it looked like a rock concert. There's these big sound towers and sound boards and this big stage and all these barriers and porta potties, all the stuff you need to put on a big event like that. Thank God for the Taxpayer Association that helped me do it in California. And I remember standing on the stage the night before. Now, you know how it is. We didn't sell tickets. We had no idea how many people were actually going to come. We were set up like it was going to be a lot. And I remember walking out on that stage and literally getting down on my knees and saying, "Dear Lord, please let somebody show up because it'll be real embarrassing if I'm alone on this stage." Well, he answered our prayers all over the country in a big way. 20,000 people showed up there in Sacramento, 25,000 in Atlanta, about 8,000 in D.C., around 20,000 at the Alamo, and thousands in locations all over the country. It took us about 6 weeks to get a rough count of how many people we thought, roughly 1.2 million people showed up. That is the largest single-day multi-city protest in human history. That's your history. That's pretty good, isn't it? So you guys own that history. So, you know, it's important you know that because no budget, there's no government telling us what to do, there's no organization driving, there's literally no organization, right? No money spent by any big entity to make that happen. You, the Levi Prestons all across this country made that happen. You, in my opinion, the heroes of the Tea Party made it happen. We're driving home after that event. I live about an hour up in the foothills above Sacramento, and we're driving home, and my son was sitting in the backseat. He was 13 years old at the time, and my son never stops talking. I don't know where he gets that. And he's in the backseat, and he is dead silent. And whenever Jacob is silent, I'm worried because he's usually, it means he's not feeling well. And so I looked in the rearview mirror and I said, Jake, what's going on back there, man? You're not saying anything. He said, I'm just thinking. And I said, what are you thinking about? And he said, I'm thinking that what we just witnessed, my kids are going to read about it in the history books. Right? I didn't see it that way. Yeah, it's incredible. So I didn't see it. I'm so caught up in the moment. I've got all my adult thoughts going on, and he's back there thinking about how profound what he just witnessed is. And so I've been, ever since Jacob said that to me, I've been very aware of the history of what we're doing and how important this is historically. I tell you that story because it's important that you know your own history, right? We're studying American history, looking at the Revolution, we're looking at everything that's happened since. But you got to know your own history. It's really important. You got to be able to tell people that you talk to about the Tea Party movement how it started, how it grew, and what it's really about. You got to be able to tell people the history of today. That you came this Saturday morning, a balmy Saturday morning outside of Chicago, and came here and there's a couple hundred people in the room. That's an extraordinary history. So we do this Tea Party movement, and then as you guys know, basically the media says, okay, well that was really great that they did that, those who even acknowledge it, but they won't last till the election, right? That's what they said. I talked to a lot of folks in the media, said, you know, this is huge, but you guys won't last. And then the election rolls around, and in 2010, you guys, I mean you people here in this room, caused the biggest change in the House of Representatives since 1938. That's pretty good, right? I promise you, that will be in the history books. And they will say it was because of the Tea Party movement. And this is incredible. Remember the history books you were reading in junior high and high school? It's going to have that for the kids in the future, that you guys did that. So, and then the media said what? Well, you're going to go away because, you know, people go home after the election and they're busy and they have lives and nothing's going to happen after this. And you didn't go away. You guys started to get in fights with the leadership in Congress about who the committee chairs were going to be. Nobody ever cared who the committee chairs were. You guys cared. And you knew, and you got involved in fights over continuing resolutions. Heck, I didn't know what a continuing resolution was before this. Right? So we got involved in all these fights, all these budget fights and continuing resolution fights and rules fights. Incredible the way the American people engage. And more of you than ever before in history read the Constitution. Incredible. More constitutions are out in the hands of average citizens now than ever before in the history of America. Some of them coming right here because of you guys, right? And by the way, that grant, that's a grant that my organization made, our organization, Citizens for Self-Governance, because we think you're doing such good work getting those out, because it's so important that you grow your organizations, and it's important you teach people about the Constitution. And you know how you heard that half that grant came in now and half will come in later? And the reason that we do that is because it's important that we know what you're doing, and the reason we want to know what you're doing is so we can teach other people. Because you guys are going to teach us exactly how you do it, how you get those constitutions out, and how it drives people to your meetings, so that I can tell that story to other groups around the country, and they can duplicate what you're doing, because you're making history right here. So that's your history. It's really important you remember your history. Now in 2012, we went into those elections. We were hopeful. I don't know how you felt by the end of November 2012. I wouldn't describe it as hopeful. You know, after that election, I heard somebody over there say depressed. I mean, it was like being kicked in the gut that night. I remember that election night. Anybody remember that night?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hard to forget, isn't it? I was at a victory party. Kind of like this, in a place kind of like this, and I was supposed to give the victory speech at the victory party, and as the results started coming in, we saw Ohio and Florida, and you knew early on it was ugly, right? And I remember being at this victory party, and Patty and Jacob and Lucy were with me, my kids, and I was just devastated. And here I am, I'm supposed to give a speech, and I'm supposed to rally the troops, and it's supposed to be a victory speech. And even when things go bad, I'm pretty much a glass half full kind of a guy. I can deal with it, I can take the punches and keep rolling. I was literally without words that night. And my kids were worried about me. I don't let on when I feel that way. My kids were saying, it's going to be okay, Dad. And I remember I couldn't say anything. I literally excused myself and went home. And it's kind of embarrassing for me to say that. It's poor leadership. And but I didn't know what to say. And there was a time, there were hours that night, and probably into the next day, where I actually lost faith. Or actually thought, are the American people this dumb? Is this really, have we lost the American people, and what is it? And, I have a friend here today, Terry, sitting over there, and we have a mutual friend, Eric, who lives in Wisconsin, and I called Eric, and Eric knows me as the eternal optimist. He calls me the rational optimist. And I called Eric, and I said, have we lost the American people? I mean, what are we doing? And he really helped me. He said, you have to remember, Mark, that the American people can only choose from what they've got. And the American people only have the information that they have. It is never the fault of the American people. Right? It's the fault of the people who claim to lead. It might be the fault of the media. There's fault out there. For sure, it might be the fault of the candidate. But you got to have faith in the American people. And he started to bring me back to faith in the American people, faith in God's plan for this country. And I started to dig in to what had really happened in the election. What really did happen? How did we lose? And when I started to dig in, it was really interesting what I found because, supposedly he won this big victory, right? Well, when I started to look at the numbers, and the numbers really came in, what I saw is that the president won re-election by approximately half of the population of Los Angeles County. In a country of 300 million people, that is hardly a resounding victory, right? It's a very narrow margin of victory. And when I looked at that, I thought, wow, that's amazing. And then I started to look at the campaigns, and that the president's campaign was incredibly well run. He had a very qualified staff, a very good campaign machine, very technologically adept, really impressive operation. And on the other side, I don't know, the Flintstones? I don't know what these guys were thinking. And we really had the old-timers who hadn't come into the new era of politics running a really bad campaign. You had a man in Mitt Romney that, in my opinion, is probably, on a human level, one of the best human beings ever to run for president of the United States, who was incapable of telling his own story, whose age did not help him to tell his own story. I mean, really a devastatingly poor campaign. And so I look at that, and you see such a bad campaign. You see the media biased against Romney and for Obama, all this stuff. And yet, literally, the margin is half of Los Angeles County. That's incredible. That's actually really encouraging. So I looked at that, and I started to dig further into the numbers. I'm a numbers guy. I really believe in the American people. I travel so much. I meet so many people. I know who you guys are. Ronald Reagan once said, my favorite Reagan quote, I have this on a bust behind my desk, on a Reagan bust, and it says, they say we live in a time when there are no heroes. They just don't know where to look. I know where to look. They're in rooms like this all over the country, so I trust you guys. And so when I started to look at the numbers and I looked at the polling, I wanted to know, what do Americans think? I know how they voted. What do they think? 60% of Americans currently believe that the federal government is too big, too intrusive, and out of control. 60%. That's not just Republicans, who, by the way, are now, what, 24%? Right? It's not just independents. It's Democrats, too. 53% of Americans say that the federal government is a direct threat to our rights and liberties. Right? Those are incredible numbers. Those are revolutionary numbers. Remember, only 33% of Americans or colonists supported the American Revolution, consider themselves patriots and revolutionaries. We've got way more than that. 25% of the American population, American voting population, says they're Tea Partiers. So we have all these extraordinary numbers. By the way, 77% of Americans were against raising the debt ceiling. Now, even if you lied to them and told them, which the media did, that we would default on our sovereign debt, 55% still said, don't raise the debt ceiling. So you look at those numbers, I looked at those numbers and I said, wow, it's incredible. Americans are with us. Their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideas, what they believe deep in their hearts, it's still with us. And I started to think about, how could that be? And that seems amazing. Now, do you guys think that the liberal media is biased against us? I mean, how long? Yeah, Illinois, right? How long has that been? Right? At least since the 1960s, right? So call it call it 50 years, 60 years that the liberal media has been buying. So the liberal media has been telling us, indoctrinating us, big government is good, higher taxes are good, redistribution of wealth is good, one more program, one more dollar, one more tax, and we will solve the problems of this country. We've been hearing that from the media since at least the 1960s. Anybody think that our educational system has a liberal bias to it?
We're Illinois.
For hell, yeah, you're Illinois, exactly. Leading the way in educational bias.
That's right. Already done.
So for how long, right? I mean, think about it. I would argue since Wilson, 100 years, right, at least, since Dewey redesigned the educational system. And so you think about that, so we're turning out by our educational system kids who are taught K through post-secondary education through doctorates. They are taught big government is good, the next government program will save you, you need smart people in Washington, D.C. to make your decisions for you. That's incredible. So now we know we've got big media biased against us and indoctrinating us. We've got education biased against us and indoctrinating us. What about government itself? Do you ever hear government say, hey, you know, government's not a very good thing. We need to be much smaller than we are. They don't say that in Chicago, do they? No. They don't say it in California, I can tell you that. They don't even generally say it in Texas, right? So from the city on up to the bully pulpit of the presidency, we have government itself telling us that government is the solution to our problems. Now this is extraordinary when you juxtapose those numbers that I just gave you about American public opinion against the fact that we've been indoctrinated by the media, by government, and by our educational system for close to 100 years.
In Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah, the culture, right? Coming straight out of Hollywood. So we've got all this stuff indoctrinating us, our kids, our grandkids, parents, we've all been indoctrinated, and yet we don't buy it. Like that is, I believe, that's God at work in a very obvious way, right? It shows you that Levi Preston is alive and well in the heart of America. And that's really encouraging, and as I was coming out of this dark place after the election, I needed to see this because what it proved to me is something really profound and important. It is very difficult to change American public opinion. 310 million people plus in this country. It is hard to influence American public opinion. And American public opinion is with us, so that's good news. It is easy to change your messaging. That's not a hard thing to do. That's what the Republicans did such a poor job of, and historically do such a poor job of, is crafting a message that resonates with the hearts and minds of the American people. So now that tells me that our task is not to dig out of some deep, dark hole. Our task is not something so monumental. Our task is to learn to talk to people, to our fellow Americans, in a way that inspires them to connect with and to believe we connect with the things that they already believe. Do you guys think you can do that? Yeah. I know you can do that. So as we've gone through this journey over the last few years, in this historical journey, we put all these people in Congress, and then, you know, we get all these people in Congress, we have these really high expectations, they're going to do all this great stuff. How's that worked out? Yeah. Not so great. Right? Not so great. So that means that all we need to do is work twice as hard and put more good people in Congress, right? So that means that if we have Republicans running the House and the Senate and Republican in the White House, then everything's going to be great in this country, isn't it? You guys are a tough audience. It's not going to be great. I mean, really, best case scenario, do you guys really think that if Mitt Romney had been elected president, that then the unicorns would have come out of the stables and the rainbow would have been? No. Right? So what we have is we have big government Republicans. They basically do the same thing. Right? I mean, look, if I have my choice between the Republicans and the Democrats, generally I'm going to choose the Republicans, right? Because they at least say that they stand for what I stand for. But the bottom line is, what we've got in this country is a fight of the ruling elite, the people in D.C. who like it the way it is, versus the rest of us. Isn't that the real fight in this country? So we all acknowledge we're not going to fix that by just sending good people to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. eats good people alive, right? Before lunch. And so we've got to do something else. And so what is that something else? Well, you know, the founders gave us this incredible gift, this incredible nugget, this little amazing Easter egg placed inside the Constitution that we've never used. Article 5 of the Constitution was written originally so that it gave Congress the power to propose amendments to the Constitution, which could then be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Just Congress had that power in the original draft. And towards the end of the Constitutional Convention, Colonel George Mason stood up and said, we've got to do something different than that. I mean, do you gentlemen realize how outrageous this is? Think about the idea that a government that has become tyrannical will propose such amendments as to restrain its own tyranny. Right? And he was so well received in what he was saying that we had to give the power to the people to amend the Constitution in cases of tyranny. He was so well received that it was one of the few provisions of the Constitution that was actually adopted unanimously. The second clause of Article 5 was unanimously adopted. It gives the states the power to amend the Constitution by 2/3 of the states requesting a call for an amending convention. The language is really important, which will then be ratified. The amendments that come out of it are ratified by 3/4 of the states. So this is incredible. It's important we get our language straight. So I started to look at this, and 2 years ago I was co-host of a conference at Harvard. Hard to believe they let a guy like me at Harvard, isn't it? It's kind of fun to wear my cowboy hat at Harvard. People look at you strange when you walk across campus dressed like this. So I co-hosted this conference at Harvard with a liberal law professor by the name of Larry Leslie, talking about the idea of an Article 5 amending convention. And I was very neutral on the idea. I kind of thought that's a swell fantasy, but we'll never get it done. But I've been studying it ever since, and it's this incredible safety cord, ripcord given to us by the founders, pull in case of emergency. Glenn Beck said, you know, this is the break glass in case of emergency, Article 5 use. And, you know, when you look at the debates around this, basically what they said is there's going to come a time when the federal government expands beyond its bounds, beyond the Constitution, becomes tyrannical, and in some way, shape, or form, we're going to need to restrain the federal government, the people themselves. And so that's the right given to us under the second clause of Article 5. And I started to investigate it, and I started to get more and more interested in it. And we started Citizens for Self-Governance, whose core mission is to return self-governance to the United States of America, to make the citizens sovereign in the country again. And so I got a call, it's getting close to a year ago now, from a gentleman by the name of Mike Ferris. I was introduced to him. Mike is the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you want to look for George Washington or James Madison or Sam Adams today, look to a guy like Mike Ferris. He's the guy that made homeschooling legal in the United States of America, literally, single-handedly. I mean, really incredible guy. Most people don't remember in the 1970s, it was illegal in almost every state in the country. And Mike single-handedly built this organization, fought back against it, and Homeschool Legal Defense Association is the premier organization fighting for homeschoolers' rights in the country. Mike is also one of the few lawyers in the country ever to argue an Article 5 case before the Supreme Court of the United States during the ERA amendment era. And so he called me up and he said, you know, we need to do an Article 5 amending convention. And I thought, okay, here we go again. This is a swell idea, but it can never be done. And he laid out a plan how we could actually get it done. And he was so good that in under an hour I was in. And I literally committed my life to getting an Article 5 amending convention done. And the plan works something like this. It's pretty simple, right? You guys are going to love this because you're Tea Partiers. You'll know how simple this is. So you need 2/3 of states to propose the call for a convention, right? And in order to get that, it's the state legislatures that do it. So both houses in the legislature have to request this call of Congress. The governor's not involved. We know that we need roughly 3,000 legislative districts. We need the support of those legislators around the country. Now, Mike knows from his experience in the homeschool movement that you need about 100 calls to a state legislator to actually get them out of their seat and get them to really pay attention and do something. And so Mike said, if we get a district captain in every district in those 3,000 districts, and we're now organizing at least 4,000, but if you get them in 3,000, and you get each of those people just to get 100 volunteers, and all those volunteers have to do is one thing. They just have to call their state legislator and ask them to call for an amending convention under Article 5. Do you think you could do that? And that's what I said. Actually, it almost seemed like a trick question. Like to a Tea Party person, really? Just 100 people to call my state legislator? Really? That's all I need to do? And I literally said, that's all I need to do. And he said, well, you know, it also is good if you can get each district to get 25 people who would be willing to go one day when there's a state legislative hearing on the call. Do you think you could get 25 people to go from each district? And I said, is that the second trick question? You know, when you remember we put 20,000 people at the state capitol. And he said, that's pretty much it. We need to do that in 2/3 of the states around the country. And he said, you know, as a Tea Party guy, as a Tea Party person across the country, I know you have the contacts in the Tea Party all across the country. He said, as the homeschool guy, we've got over 300,000 homeschool families all over the country. We can make it happen in the homeschool movement. Seems to me, between you and I, we could actually make this happen. And I was literally convinced. It took no extra research, nothing. I mean, I just thought, yeah, we could actually do this. And, you know, I've been thinking about what's the primary debate in America today. You know, we fight this fight all the time. Is it Obamacare or is it free market health care, right? Is it high taxes? Is it low taxes? Is it more regulations or less regulations? Is it bigger government? Is it smaller government? Is it the EPA telling us what to do with our environment, or is it some other agency telling us what we can do with our property rights? This is the debate we have in America. It's a debate about what should we do, right? What's the right decision? And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've come to the conclusion that's the wrong debate. You know, there's a political theorist, Schneider, who I read and a bunch of my group reads, and he wrote that the definition of the alternatives is the ultimate expression of political power. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the fight that you get in over high taxes. So Republicans who don't want higher taxes for education hate children, right? Do you love children or you hate children? That's the alternatives, right? That's what's put on you. In the environment, are you for clean air or are you against clean air? Right? Once you're in that debate, you've lost that debate, haven't you? Right? So that's what I mean when I say defining the alternatives. And the way the alternatives are defined for us in all these debates we're having right now, the underlying premise of everything I just said is that the decision should be made in Washington, D.C. Right? That's the premise. So if that's the premise, if no matter what the decision is, the decision will be made in D.C., who loses? We lose. So we shouldn't accept that premise. That's not the fight. This is the real fight in America today. The real fight is a very simple question. 2 words. You should ask it about anything that the government says they want to do. And the question is, who decides? Who decides? That's really the question. Does Washington, D.C. decide, or do you decide as an individual or a family? Does D.C. decide, or does your community decide, your county, your state? Who decides? And I would argue that that decision should be answered as often as possible that the individual, or the family, or the private sector decide. Are you guys with me on that?
Yeah.
So this is the defining narrative of our time. You know, by the way, I can go into a room of lefties, of progressives. And I do that all the time, by the way. I was in Arizona at a left-wing meeting. They're called Citizen University, the Citizens Collaboratory. 90, I was the only conservative there, really. Okay, a room of like 50 people, leaders from all across the country. And if I say to them, who decides? Same answer as you. They think they should decide at home, in their communities, in their cities, in their states. Incredible how this question unifies. People understand that they don't have the power to decide any longer, and whether you're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, however you ID yourself, you believe that you should decide. That's our God-given right to decide about our own lives, right? And so this is the fundamental premise that I go with. Now, I want you to think about how that relates to this idea of an Article 5 Convention of States. I'm talking to Mike, and Mike is an amazing constitutional lawyer, and he says, you know, Mark, the reason that I'm doing this is because the main problem facing the United States today is a question of jurisdiction. This is a jurisdictional question that we're facing. This is a very legal way of saying, who decides? Right? And that's what I'm thinking. I'm a lawyer too, but I'm thinking he's saying who decides. He's saying that the jurisdiction is out of whack, that all this stuff is being decided legally, jurisdictionally, in Washington, D.C., by Congress, by the President, by the Supreme Court, instead of jurisdictionally by us, the people. And so now think about this. Wow, what do you fix? Well, Mark Levin's told us a lot of things we can fix, right? And again, I think this is providence. You might hear, I'm a big believer that God's hand is on this nation and that providence is driving what happens. And so Mark Levin is writing a book called The Liberty Amendments. And who in here has read The Liberty Amendments? If you haven't, I highly recommend it. And honestly, I'm going to give you a trick that Mark wouldn't appreciate, which is if you read the opening chapter and the last chapter and the beginning of every paragraph, you get the book. You don't need all the details. There's a good summary at the end of every chapter. Don't tell Mark I said that. He's very mad at me. So while we're starting to roll with the Convention of States project, I have a couple people I'm going to introduce you to from our project over here. While we're starting to get this project rolling, and we're starting to build out the grassroots infrastructure and put together the budget for the project, I'm at an event in Phoenix, and the conservative talk show host Hugh Hewitt is hosting this live event in Phoenix, right? And I'm on the panel there. And unbeknownst to me, Mark Levin is going to Skype in from the bunker, right? He doesn't go out and speak publicly very much. And Mark and I talk 4 or 5 days a week. He's a friend, and we talk by email constantly. And you got to know he's the most amazing multitasker. I tend to email him during his show, and he gets back to me while he's still talking. Right? He's a totally amazing guy. And so he Skypes in, and he didn't know I was on the panel. He sees me on the panel, and we say some niceties. And we get to ask a question. I ask Mark the question. I say, Mark, it seems to me that we've lost control of the federal government. There's really nothing we can do in D.C. And that the only way to fix things is the people acting through the mechanism of the states have to restrain the federal government. And he literally choked. He's writing his book. His book's not out yet, and he says, "Well, Mark's not at a loss for words very often, right?" He says, "I'm writing something about that, and I've got a book coming out. I can't really talk about it because it's embargoed, and but yeah, I agree with you." Now, I'm sitting on a stage on a dais with 4 other people, and I've got my phone out sitting in front of me, and it buzzes, and he's texting me while he's still on the screen. And he says, "We need to talk." I don't know how I did it. I didn't even see him do it, right? I'm watching it on the screen. And so we talk afterwards, and he tells me what the book is about, and essentially he's proposing an Article 5 amending convention. And I tell him the project we're working on, and we realize we've come to the exact same place at the exact same time in history. That's not a coincidence, right? So as Levin did so, in my opinion, so profoundly with liberty and tyranny for the Tea Party movement, and created the intellectual foundation for the Tea Party movement with the book Liberty and Tyranny, he's now done the same for the Article 5 movement in this country. So Mark launches the book. Providentially, we launch Convention of States literally the same week that Mark launches his book, and the effort explodes. I mean, it's just been crazy ever since. We now have 4 state legislatures that have pre-filed the legislation. The latest was New Mexico in the last week. Florida, Virginia, South Carolina have pre-filed the legislation. We're probably pushing towards 13 or 14 states where we have primary legislative sponsors. We expect to have it in the legislatures in 15 to 20 states and pass it between 15 and 20, towards 13 or 14 states where we have primary legislative sponsors. We expect to have it in the legislatures in 15 to 20 states and pass it between 15 and 20 states this year, that call for the amending convention. We expect to pass the rest of them in 2015. In 2016, we plan to hold the first state-called constitutional amending convention in the history of the United States of America. I hope and believe that at that convention, some of the Levi Prestons of the world will be at that convention. And we'll be delegates at this convention as we refound the nation. Now, what do you do at a convention?
We're in Illinois, don't forget.
Yeah, but I got a room of people here, though, right? Look, so delegates are going to go to that convention. Now, what can you do in a convention like that? Well, the call for this convention is specifically limited to amendments that would be germane to the subject matter of limiting the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government. You like the sound of that? Oh, yeah. I like the sound of that, too. Okay. By the way, people on the left buy into this. They want to run their own city. People in Illinois, the government in Illinois, they want to be as liberal as they can be, and they don't want some conservative administration stopping them from being as liberal as they can be. And if you ever need to scare your liberal friends into supporting this, just say, oh, so you like the idea of, say, Ted Cruz as president and the Republicans controlling the House and Senate, and then we can tell Chicago what to do. That would be good, huh? They don't like that. They want local control. So what kinds of things could we do? 75% of Americans support term limits on Congress, right? Yeah. Do you know that we have them in 23 states? And Terry and I, our mutual friend Eric O'Keefe, helped get that done in 23 states. We had congressional term limits in place. And then our lovely Supreme Court told us we don't have the right to limit our congressional delegations, right? So we can fix that by amendment. You know, the Supreme Court, you get people on the Supreme Court now, they serve 25, 30 years. Do you know that the average age appointed to the Supreme Court at the founding of the country was 45 years old, and average life expectancy for males was 50? right? And so they expected that these people would serve 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 years maximum, right? This is what they expected. They never expected that one justice could swing constitutional jurisprudence for a generation or two, right? And so Levin has proposed term limits on the Supreme Court of the United States. You know, most of the stuff that we don't like that the federal government does that we think is generally unconstitutional and overreached by the federal government is done under the auspices of the Commerce Clause, right? Yep. Yeah. In the days of the founders, commerce was very rationally defined. Interstate commerce was defined as goods moving across the border from one state to another. That was it. That's when they said that the federal government had an enumerated power to regulate interstate commerce. That's what they were referring to. And based on a seminal case 80 or 90 years ago, the Supreme Court, maybe 100 years ago, started expanding this jurisprudence to the point where now a farmer who grows wheat for his own consumption can be regulated by the federal government because he's not buying wheat in interstate commerce. Right? So the act of non-buying, the act of non-consumption, the act of non-production can be seen as interstate commerce now. So in other words, the Commerce Clause covers everything. Anything the federal government want to do. So how would you like to be able to restrict the Commerce Clause in a new amendment to the Constitution? So there's a lot of great ideas floating around out there. What do I support? It doesn't. I'm not in it for that. I'm in it to get this amending convention done. It will take every bit of political skill, every bit of budget we can muster, every volunteer hour we can get, all of you, to actually make this a reality, to make this history, to call the first citizen-led, state-led amending convention in the history of this country. So my fight, what I'm primarily engaged in, is the organizing effort for that. We now have volunteers all over the country, literally volunteers in all the states. I think we now have, Natasha, 38 state directors across the country. It's incredible, I mean, what's happening. I was talking to Mike Ferris 2 nights ago, and he was on the phone, and he literally almost in tears told me that the quality of people that we're recruiting that are leading this state by state is higher than anything he's ever seen in his life, higher than anything that he ever thought possible in his life. He said, you know, I thought I was going to spend the next 5 years of my life running around state to state, making this happen in every state the way I had to do in the homeschool movement. He said, they don't really need very much help from me. These are extraordinary people, and what's happening is it's youth. It's the cream of the crop of the activists who have spent 5 years earning their battle stripes, getting the stars in battle, learning the political system, understanding your own legislatures, building relationships with your own legislators. There's an army of people out there who are ready to make this happen, and I swear to you with everything I have in me, I'm going to fight, and we are going to get an amending convention, and we, the people, are going to restrain the federal government of this country. So there are 2 people I want to point out to you and introduce one to you who's going to come and say a few words. And so the first person is, we opened an office. Now, Citizens for Self-Governance has never had an office before. When I was with Tea Party Patriots, philosophically, we never had an office or a virtual organization. We try to operate real lean. We're not looking to build a big organization. But this Convention of States efforts was so intense, and it was so people intense, it required so much effort, that we set up our first office. And we have an office in Purcellville, Virginia. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the office because it's really extraordinary. It's nearby Patrick Henry College. Anybody know Patrick Henry College? There's a few people who have. Patrick Henry College, I would argue, is one of the premier, if not the premier, Christian college in the nation. Mike Ferris, in addition to being the founder of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, was also called to the ministry of opening this incredible Christian college, which opened, I think, is it 13 years now? 12, 13, okay, 11 years ago, Purcellville, Virginia. Mike is so modest. The first time I went to college, he said, oh, you got to come out and see the college, and I built this little college in Virginia. Oh man, you go out there, it looks like it's been there for 150 years. It looks like this beautiful Virginia plantation campus. There are about 350 students on campus at any one time right now. And one of the things we do is we hire as many of the extraordinary young people coming out of this college as we possibly can. These are kids that are committed to their faith, and as importantly, they're committed to the country and to saving America, and they're being trained up to fight the fight to save the country. So in our office there in Purcellville, we now have 8 staff. I think 7 out of the 8 are recent Patrick Henry graduates. Our senior elder statesman in the office is our Chief Counsel, Robert Kelly. She's 24 years old. This is really important to me because, you know, as I look around the room, I see a lot of people who are getting gray like me, some of you a little bit more gray than me, and we need the next generation of warriors, right? Because this fight goes on forever. So we've got this incredible staff out there in the office, and then my wife, Patty, some of Patty, and she has come side by side with me. She is the development for Citizens for Self-Governance. She's responsible for raising all the money that allows us to do everything that we do all across the country. Wow. She is about 10 times the woman that I am a man. I couldn't do anything that I do without her, and she's allowed us to build this effort by her skilled fundraising efforts. And she just became overwhelmed, and we have so many supporters now, so many people doing a great job and willing to step up and help out that we needed somebody to help her. So we hired an extraordinary Patrick Henry graduate who lives right here in your hometown of Chicago, and that's Natasha Meckler. I gotta tell you something extraordinary that she does every day, and this is what she spends a lot of her time doing is, you know, we have a lot of donors now, online donors. People give $5, $10, $20. We've got some big donors out there too, but the majority of our donors by number give under $25, would you say? So under $25. Natasha calls and speaks to every single one of those people. Really incredible. I mean, and there's two reasons why I want you to know that and why I think that's important. Number one is every one of those people is equally important. And they're just as important as the person who writes the $10,000 check, really. Because whatever they're willing to put on the line, we appreciate, and we are humbled by the fact that they're willing to put that on the line, and they're willing to take the step and put in the credit card or send the check. We really, I mean, I can't even explain how indebted and the gratitude I feel to those people. I know Natasha feels the same way. And the other reason is because it connects our organization to the people out there who support it. She knows better than, and I would argue better than me, better than anybody in the country, who is supporting us. And when I say in the broad sense, what do they like? What is their heart? And she takes notes of conversations, and we have a database of all these notes, and I go in there all the time and read the notes strictly for inspiration. Because I can't believe, it's just a miracle to me that all these people are out there and they say, you know, we know you're going to save the nation. You hear that over and over, right? We know that this is what will save the nation. I'm in, I'll do whatever I can. How can I volunteer? We have people who say, I'm on a fixed income on Social Security. I can only give $10. I just want you to know that I'm with you. And those are extraordinary stories, and they're important. Those are by precedent all over the country. So one of the most important people in our organization is Natasha, because she lets those people know how important they are, and she brings to our community the heart that they bring to the table when they sit in front of that computer monitor or they write out that check from their checkbook. And then all across the country we have these incredible volunteers I've been telling you about who step up. In each state we have what we call the state director, we have district captains, and then we have somebody that's really important. This has to be done by the legislature, right? So we need somebody that helps us coordinate with the legislature in every state. And so we're really lucky in the state. We have somebody who's really good, who's here, and who's going to come up and say a few words to you. We've got Vicki Deppes here, and she is our state legislative liaison. So I'm going to turn it over to her for a few minutes.
Thank you for being here. I'm the legislative liaison for the Convention of States here in Illinois, and what that means is any legislator that has a question about this project, about the legislation, I'm their point of contact. I'm somebody who is officially affiliated with the Convention of States project. I've been vetted. I'm in the loop with communication with them. So if you are corresponding with your representative or your senator and they have a question that you can't answer, by all means contact me. If I don't know the answer already, I know how to find the answer. If also you feel like they're not taking you seriously and they need somebody with a business card, that's me. I put my cards around on the table, and there's some on the sign-in table, so please be sure to take a couple. Our website is there. Visit Convention of States. Is it com or org? It's com. It's on the card. And I took the legislative liaison position because I thought it would get me out of having to talk in front of big groups like this. But since I'm the only leader in Illinois, I'm kind of having to play all the positions until we can recruit some more folks. I wanted to say I was so pleased to hear Carol talk about how West Suburban Patriots is a nonpartisan group, and I like that because Convention of States is a nonpartisan group as well. And as I'm sure you all know, Springfield is composed primarily of Democrats. 2/3 of our General Assembly is occupied by Democrat members. And so this is not going to go anywhere unless we reach out to our friends and neighbors who typically vote Democrat. And with Congress's approval rating at about 6% right now, that shouldn't be too hard. My personal favorite amendment is one that would stop politicians from exempting themselves and their friends from the laws that they pass. And I think your Democrat friends will be just as enthusiastic about that as you are, and I am. A question that came up several times while I was visiting with you before we got started is this really going to go anywhere in Illinois? And is it really a good idea to give more power to Mike Madigan and his friends? And I can really resonate with you on that. I have 2 daughters. One just graduated from college and one is halfway through. And we have sat down with both of them and talked about them living out of state because Illinois is just on a path to disaster. We're going to become the next Detroit if something significant does not change soon. And in fact, we just drove back from Oklahoma yesterday, settling our daughter on her first job after graduating college. So I totally get what you're saying there. But what this can accomplish is, even though more power is returned to the states, there are some things that they can't do. They can't print money like Washington does, and so they can't hide the results of their legislative action. And the other thing that we can do is, if we cannot persuade them to represent our interests by voting at the ballot box, we can vote with our feet and move to Indiana or Wisconsin, where clearer heads are prevailing, and instead of having these things get exported to Washington, where they're imposed on the entire country. So I think this is really a worthwhile undertaking, even here in Illinois, even as bad a shape as we're in. So I wanted to encourage you, we still need a state director here in Illinois. We need district captains those are the folks that recruit 100 people. We need a coalitions director, and that is somebody who does what I'm doing now. They show up at these breakfasts, Rotary clubs, union meetings, anybody that will give them a microphone to inform folks about the project and get people excited about it. There's a number of smaller projects. If those things are more than you can take on right now, there are smaller individual projects that you can learn more about at the website. And I want to echo what Mark said about learning your history. And once you're done thumbing through Mark Levin's book, there's another one called The 5,000-Year Leap by Cleon Skousen. And it's about 40 years old, but it might as well have been written yesterday. It talks in detail about the Constitution and our government and why it's set up as it was, and what the founders thought would happen. Well, if we do it this way, this is what will happen. If we do it that way, that's what will happen. It's like they had a crystal ball, friends.
Wow.
It's people say the Constitution's outdated and it needs to be changed. It really doesn't, because Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun, and I really believe that's true. So I'm going to turn it back to Mark, and thank you for your time.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and take some questions.
Great speech. I have to tell you, I've been very disheartened with what's been going on, and you kind of renewed the flame and made me feel there's actually some hope. My question is, though, what have you anticipated in terms of pushback? I mean, do you expect that the IRS is going to be set upon you? Do you expect that other things are going to be happening? You're going to be searching backgrounds, looking for dirt? I don't expect these people to sit idly by while we take away their power base.
Yes, yes, and yes. So the IRS has already been set upon us. Our organization, Citizens for Self-Governance, funded the first and frankly the only class action against the IRS for its recent behavior. And we did that because somebody had to step up on behalf of, especially the Tea Party group. So we've got, I think, probably 10 named plaintiffs who wanted their names used out front, and I don't know, another couple dozen behind the scenes who are signed plaintiffs. There's two things that happen when you do that, and one of the reasons I did it also was because I believe it provides a shield of sorts. So our group, by filing this litigation, puts ourselves in the spotlight, and it makes it pretty obvious and gives us a pretty good bully pulpit if they come after us in other ways. And we can say, look, obviously we're being targeted because we filed suit against the IRS and we're doing this other stuff. If you try to say that stuff when you're already not in the public eye for that kind of stuff, then people will say you're just paranoid, right? It's not paranoia if it's true, but that's what people will say. And so I expect we'll be attacked. I think the major pushback ultimately will come from Washington, D.C. itself. When they believe that we're going to forcefully divest them of their power, there is little that they will not do to avoid that. I think our advantage is that they don't believe that we can do this. And so really I think speed and aggression right now are our best tactic, because the further we can get down the road before they actually realize that this is going on, those in DC that even know what we're doing just think it's funny, really. And they have no idea that this is actually happening. They have no idea that legislation is pre-filed in 4 states, that we're going to get it in 15 states this year. They have no idea that thousands of you around the country are already working on this. So the stronger we can build the infrastructure, the grassroots infrastructure, before DC reacts, the better off we'll be. So I think it's going to happen, but I think we're ready for it.
This is kind of a question or comment. I don't know what you have on the website, but when you talk about the history, is that something that we can write down, or can someone compile the history from the last couple of years, you know, the numbers of people, what started it, and then also compile, you know, a synopsis of what we're talking about as far as, you know, term limits and, you know, I don't know why that's beeping.
I think you're right under the speaker.
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
So first of all, on the history of the Tea Party movement itself, there's actually, I don't normally shill my own book, but I wrote a book called Tea Party Patriots, and all that history, that's over there. You can borrow it in your lending library or buy that online. Okay. All that history that I just went through is contained in that book.
All right. Cool.
And so that's there. As far as the Article 5 stuff, if you go to conventionofstates.com, everything I said in both in a shorter version and a much longer complete version is there at the website. Okay. One of the things you'll see that's phenomenal, which is why I know this is going to happen, is we've got volunteers from all over the country that are creating and putting up better materials than we make ourselves, right? That Alabama video that you saw? So our coordinators in Alabama, our captains, set up this video explaining Convention of States and the Article 5 process in a 3.5-minute video that is just extraordinary. So if you go to conventionofstates.com, all the resources are there. You can download the entire Convention of States handbook written by Dr. Michael Ferris. So all the resources you could possibly need are there.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation, and learned a lot from it, which is great to be here for that. You'd mentioned a number of numbers about, which really seem to be all great in terms of conservatism. People seem to be wanting less federal government, less federal judge involvement, legislative from the bench, all those kind of things. Yet I'm perplexed. In 2008, 52% of Americans voted for the current president and his minions. And then in this most recent election, you know, we got a glimpse of what happened over those last couple of years of Obamacare getting rammed down our throats, and a bunch of issues getting at the federal level rammed down our throats that we just didn't want, yet we still lost the election. And the margin of error, or the margin of difference, decreased somewhat, but I'm trying to reconcile in my mind how all of these numbers that you cited are good and show, you know, a sincere interest in conservatism and wanting smaller government, etc. Yet when it comes to the people pulling the trigger at the voting booth, we get quite the opposite. And it wasn't just on a national level, it was local. We were decimated. I mean, we lost nearly every major, we didn't gain any seats significantly, we lost seats. How do we reconcile those differences in what's going on in America? Because it's just not adding up in my head.
Okay.
Voter fraud.
Yeah, well, that's good. So,
And what do we do about that? If that's the case, if it is voter fraud, if it is deception, lying, cheating?
I certainly think voter fraud plays a role. I don't think it's the role, but I think it plays a role. You know, there's a great book by John Funn called Who's Counting? Sits on the shelf right behind my desk, which describes voter fraud all across the country. By the way, the most amazing thing about voter fraud, the people who are most affected by voter fraud are in cities that are primarily cities of color. And color on color voter fraud is the worst voter fraud in the country, proven across the country. So when you've got African American leadership stepping up and saying voter fraud's not a problem, what they mean is it's working really well for us. It's not a problem. So, you know, politics is a skill, right? So there's grassroots activism, and that is different, equally important, but different than political skill. And what we saw in this last election, and I think what we generally see by Republicans, is a lack of political skill. And so you have to paint a vision for people to buy. You can't simply sell a negative. And I remember during the Romney campaign waiting to see something that I could applaud. Not with a critical eye, but just wanting to see something that made me feel like, yeah, I want that, right? That's what I'm waiting to hear Ronald Reagan talk about a shining city on a hill. Waiting to have a vision painted that I could buy into. Look, I think Mitt Romney is a great man. I mean, a great man. Amazing man with an amazing family. Imagine having that family sitting in the White House. How incredible that would be as an image for the United States of America. I never saw anything like that. I saw nothing that inspired me. And here I was, the most willing vessel for inspiration. Just give me something, please. And they gave us nothing. And so if you look at the polling, and I just saw something on this analysis yesterday, the biggest margin on all the different polling factors between the candidates, competence, Mitt Romney was ahead, by the way. Handling the economy, Mitt Romney was ahead, by the way. Trustworthiness for international affairs, Mitt Romney was ahead. Likability, it wasn't even close. It was like a 40% gap in likability. So he did nothing to make the American people like him or be inspired by him as a leader. And this is really important because we conservatives tend to play politics based on facts and figures, right? We're logical people. This is how our brains work. There's a book called The Righteous Mind, which is a great book about how people think, especially politically, and how we're wired. And if you say to me, look, if we increase the minimum wage by $1, then we will have 6% more unemployment, and African American unemployment will go up by 2%, and these are the numbers, I'm convinced. You've just sold me, right? But for most people, if you say, look, don't you want poor people to have another $1 an hour in their paycheck? Do you really think somebody can live on $8 an hour? I mean, that's heartless. That's the winning argument. It's emotion. Right? And most people decide first on emotion. It's the way human beings are wired. So what that means is we just have to learn to speak differently. I said it's easier to change your message than to change American public opinion. I'll give you a perfect example. I was in New Mexico recently. New Mexico has a fight going on right now over what they call their permanent fund. It's the slush fund or the rainy day fund. And a lot of states, well, not California or Illinois, but a lot of states have them. New Mexico, being a relatively liberal state, has a big permanent fund, and they manage it really well. And there's now a fight because the liberals in New Mexico want 1% more per year out of the fund for the kids. Right? It's just for the kids. Come on, for the kids, right? For their education system. Now, New Mexico per capita spends at the middle, exact middle per capita per kid, you know, of all the states in the nation. And the week before I got there was an amazing front page news story in the Albuquerque newspaper that though they spend at the middle per capita, they are number 50 in performance in the nation, right? They're terrible. They suck. It's just horrible. Right? So a little more money will fix that, right? Just 1%. So how do you think the Democrats frame that debate? You hate kids? It's only 1%. You must hate kids. You Republicans are just evil. You won't give 1%. Well, now, by the way, the actuaries say if they take that 1%, they will start to damage the fund. They've hit that break point in the fund. Right? So I went there and I spoke to a group of business leaders about this size of relatively conservative business leaders. So there were some liberal legislators in the room who didn't like what I had to say very much. And what I said was, you have to reframe the debate. Here's how I frame the debate in New Mexico, and here's how I would frame this debate anywhere. I asked the question, why is it that liberals hate children so much? Right, and people were just, they couldn't believe that I'm saying this. And I said, no, I'm serious, they hate kids. I mean, you here in New Mexico spend about the middle of the road per capita, and you have the worst education system in the United States. Who's getting fired? Who's being held accountable? Well, they hate the kids. They're willing to sell the kids into work slavery for the rest of their lives. Because they're going to be minimum wage kids at best, can't get jobs, they're uneducated, they're illiterate, and you want more money by the same people to spend on that stuff? Anybody who would do that hates children. I was with all these very liberal people yesterday in Phoenix, right? And we were having a discussion about global warming, which I'm always in the minority in that group, and fracking, right? And I asked them, why do you guys hate poor people so much? Oh, you know, you say that to a liberal, it's like, those are fighting words, man. We love poor people. We want to do everything for poor people. I said, well, yeah, what you want to do is you want to make gasoline $4 or $5 or $8 a gallon. I understand that you rich white people in this meeting can all afford that. But you know what? What about the maid that cleans your house who's trying to decide whether to buy her daughter a jacket or put gas in her car? She's suffering and you don't care. And they just stare at you when you say that. And then I say, you know what I'm in it for? I'm in it for the poor people in America because I want to give them a path to elevate themselves out of poverty. That's why we're in it. With almost any argument that conservatives make, we have to abandon the discussion of facts and figures and statistics, and we have to make the emotional argument. You know what I say about Convention of States to people? What, you don't want people to be free to make their own decisions? Wait, so there's two sides to this debate, right? We talked about defining the alternatives. You either believe other people should make decisions for you, or you believe you should make your own decisions. That's the debate. What's your choice, Russ? Do you know anybody who would say, oh, you know, well, I would like most of my decisions made by other people? Yeah. No, everybody should answer, well, I would like the decisions, I'd like to make my own decisions. Great, then you're a supporter of Convention of States. You want to make your own decisions. And so it's about narrative.
I'm just curious, why isn't anybody saying repeal the 17th Amendment and the 16th Amendment?
I don't know whether it's viable or not. I mean, I always look at the political reality, can we get it done? I think one of the most important things we could do to fix the country if we could get it done would be to repeal the 17th Amendment. For those of you who don't know, don't feel bad, I didn't know this until somebody taught it to me recently. 17th Amendment provided for the direct election of senators by the people of the states. And originally they were appointed by the state legislatures. This is one of the fundamental breakpoints in American history. And it happened in 1913, which, by the way, if you do your research, is the worst year in government in American history. The Fed was formed. The Reapportionment Act of 1913 limited the House of Representatives to 435 members. 16th Amendment was passed, and 17th Amendment was passed. So this is really important because it was originally designed that the House of Representatives was the people's house. This is where we spoke directly to our government and where we got our representation. And the senators were intended to represent state government in Washington, D.C. Not to represent us. It was to have nothing to do with us directly as the people. It was to represent our state governments in Washington, D.C. And they actually had one primary function, the senators originally. And that primary function was to go to Washington, D.C. and say one word, which is no. That was it. Because the founders knew that the federal government would impinge on the power of the states and the authority of the states, and the senators were there to protect the states from that. Now imagine if your state senators, well maybe not your state senator, or mine in California, but imagine if Texas's state senator went to Washington, D.C., and the folks in D.C. said it would be a great idea to impose an unfunded mandate on Texas that will cost Texas $2 billion a year and will take control away from them, and they will get nothing for it. Imagine that senator votes for that. And then he goes home, and they say, you voted for what? Well, you can stay home. We're sending somebody else in your place, is what the state legislature would say. Now what happens is the senators are actually incentivized to draw power to Washington, D.C. because that's where their power is. Their power is not in the state with the state legislature. Their power is in Washington, D.C. So it is in their best interest to take power from their home state and to deposit it in Washington, D.C. So that's in there. I think that's something that's viable to be debated at convention. I'm not sure whether we can get it done. I would love to see that get done. So.
I'm all in favor of what you are pushing. I'm all in favor of what you're promoting. What the hell is going to keep us from getting something that we don't want out of this convention?
How do we make sure this doesn't run away? That's really your real question, right? Because it could, I mean, theoretically, we say it could run away. And what I would tell you is that there's a couple of ways. Fundamentally, the end game is that I can't think of anything that 38 states would pass, 3/4 of the states, that's crazy, left or right. My friends on the left fear the same thing. But I've run a grid. You know, people on the left are afraid we're going to outlaw abortion, right? God willing, but the people on the left, that's their fear. And so you cannot possibly find 38 states that would vote to outlaw abortion. You can't even get close. People on the right fear that they're going to limit gun rights. You can't possibly find 38 states that will even be close. And to put it in the inverse, which shows you even more how safe this is, it only takes 13 states to kill anything. And it only takes one house in 13 states to kill anything. Right now, we on the conservative side have 24 states where we control both houses of the legislature and the governorship. You just can't find anything bad that can come out of it. So that is the ultimate protection. And if you look at history, no convention in history has ever run away. There were 11 conventions in the 2 years before the Constitutional Convention. None of them ran away. All the delegates stayed within their charge. There have been many interstate conventions since then for interstate compacts. For example, negotiating the Colorado River Compact. All delegates have always stayed within their charge. And so I think, and then let me give you the last one, which I think is the most important. Today, Congress does not follow the Constitution, right? Right. That's a runaway convention every day. They pass legislation, they know it's unconstitutional, they pass it anyway. Is there anybody that believes that the president follows the Constitution? So the president acts unconstitutionally every day and tweaks the Constitution. How about the Supreme Court? Do you believe they respect the Constitution? No. So right now, all three branches of our government are involved in a daily runaway convention. I trust the people more than I trust the federal government.